What's happening? Welcome to another edition of Riot Starter TV. It's always a pleasure to rock with you all. I am Kalonji Changa. For those of you who are unfamiliar with my person, I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to serve us. I am a representative of the FTP movement. That is the organization. So I appear courtesy of the FTP movement. I'm also, of course. One of the founding members of Black Power Media, the platform which we're on right now. So we welcome you. If it's your first time stopping through, definitely, subscribe, hit the like button, the bell, and all that good stuff. And, we here with Army, People's Army, we're in the building. So definitely, grateful to see you all on here. Today, we have a powerful guest that we'll be bringing on shortly. But just before that, I want to mention our latest initiative, which is called Liberation Housing. It's an initiative that we've put together here at the FTP movement. And, what Liberation Housing is, it is a program in which we are looking to make sure that our OGs and elders, veterans of the movement are taken care of. So we're looking to put together housing, because so often we salute our political prisoners and we talk about our elders and our OGs, and we don't look back. We don't see what's going on with them, so on and so forth. I have several OGs right now who are ill and terminally ill and suffering from different situations when it comes to just being victims and not necessarily victims, but fighting against capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism. So, I wanted to let you all know about that. The website, if you are interested in supporting that effort, thenaturalfestival.com/liberation housing. That's the piece that you see on the screen right now. Okay, so today, 57 years ago, this week, we lost one of our most revered freedom fighters. We lost a brother that was seriously committed, a brother who gave us a clear example of what transformation looks like. Oftentimes we throw away certain people because of the fact that they don't read what we read, they don't eat what we eat, they don't think how we think. They're not considered for our people, quote unquote. So we kind of just toss them to the side and we say, the hell with them. And one such brother, who was known as Detroit Red, is an example of a person who can be transformed, much like George Jackson, who came after him. So today, what I wanted to do, many of you saw the interview I did a few months ago with Paul Lee and Peter Goldman in regards to Haj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, and his assassination. And, I was told, not that I didn't already know, but I was told and reminded that, one of the foremost authorities on it, Haj Malik Shabazz, his life and his assassination, should be on Riot Starter TV. And I'm speaking about Baba Zak A. Kondo. And for those of you who are not familiar, Baba Zac Kondo is a professor of history at Baltimore City Community College. He spent more than 31 years teaching history and Black studies on the college level full time. He's in his 17th year at Baltimore City College. Again, he's generally considered one of the foremost authorities on Malcolm X and Black radicalism in the United States, and possibly the world. He is author of the most authoritative and controversial work on Malcolm's assassination, which happens to be Conspiracies, Unravelling, the Assassination of Malcolm X. And he served as a consultant on several films on Malcolm, including Spike Lee's motion picture and Malcolm X Black Sides documentary, Malcolm X Making It Plain, Brother Minister, the assassination of Malcolm X, and recently he was featured in the Netflix documentary Who Killed Malcolm X. So we're going to talk about a number of those things, but I want to welcome today to our platform Baba Zac Kondo. What's happening, Baba? How you feeling?
Doing well. How you doing, Baba?
Hey man, I'm feeling like $1 million now. I'm on screen with you. I feel like I'm moving up in the world.
Well, I'm honored I'm honored to be here. It's one of my great privileges.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I read a small portion of your bio, so if you don't mind, I would like you to give us an extended version and why you chose to pursue the life of El Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X. I mean, what got you into that, and made you so passionate to get involved in that those studies?
Right. Well, what I would suggest is that it was probably by default more than anything else. When I was in the 7th grade, I was bused. I'm from Newport News, Virginia. That's the Hampton Roads Peninsula area, southeast, Virginia. And my 7th grade year, we were bused to what had been an all-white school, and so it was just us, one bus, and we were all from this African. I grew up in a damn near an all-African neighborhood. We could count on one hand how many non-Africans, and so we go to this school, and the most blatant, racist rednecks that you could imagine are teachers. They're the principal. They're the administrators at the school. And so they just discriminate against us on all levels. So for the first time, previously racism was more subtle, but now it was blatant. And I guess you could say I was looking for a way to fight it, but I was, I'm 11, 12 years old. Hell, I don't know how to fight institutionalized racism like that. And so anyway, one day I'm in the post library. Most of us were, military. All of our fathers, were either retired or still active duty. And I see this book called The Autobiography of Malcolm X. I had heard the name Malcolm a year or two earlier, and I saw this book and I picked it up. Had a picture of this mean-looking brother speaking with his hand, with one of his fingers like that, and it caught my attention. Anyway, make a long story short, I take the book home. And mind you, I was one of those brothers that, when it was time to do a book report, I would go into the library and find the smallest, thinnest book I could find. So I pulled this book off the shelf, and it's 350-something pages. It's like that thick. And I started browsing it, and then I took it home and started reading it. And for the first time really in my life, I became engrossed in knowledge, in studying, in understanding. And it was basically reading Malcolm's story. I can't explain why it resonated with me, but it did. And what I could tell you is that once I read the book, and I actually read it about 3 times, I read it, and then checked it out again. And then a few weeks later, I checked it out again. And I really can't explain it, but what was happening was it was raising my racial consciousness. Previously, I didn't have much of a racial consciousness. I probably had the same racial consciousness as a typical African child, which generally in Newport News, Virginia in the early 1970s was minute. But something started happening to me as I was reading Malcolm. And then if Malcolm talked about somebody, I wanted to know who that person was. So so Garvey, I'd heard the name Garvey before, but I started, after Malcolm, I ended up reading The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. I read The Souls of Black Folks by Du Bois. I read Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington. I started reading, lots of books dealing with African people. And then I got on the Black Panthers after that. I still remember reading If They Come in the Morning, Angela Davis. So you could say in the 7th grade, I started developing, an African-centered consciousness. Or as my family would say, Zach got into that black stuff, that African stuff. And I've been there. I've been there ever since. Went to school, studied history. It was like I picked areas that would allow me to focus on African people, directly, and then always Malcolm. So I got into Malcolm, and then one thing I'll say this, when I was in high school, every opportunity to write a paper, it was either going to be about the Panthers or it was going to be about Malcolm. And see, I was an athlete, and so I was like, I was kind of like a campus celebrity. So every time I did things like that, I didn't notice at the time. I actually found out later, but it would go around the school. Zach wrote another. My name was Clark then. I heard Zach Clark wrote something about the Black Panthers parties and this and that, or he wrote something about Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey and stuff like that. So I didn't know this until I had graduated and stuff like that. And then another important event in all of this. When I was in college, word started going around. I went to a school in the Shenandoah Valley, and there was about a hour away, there was another, mountain school, and Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, was going to be speaking. So the Black Student Alliance at my school, we decided to get one of the campus buses. It was a van. So maybe about 10, 15 of us, we rode over the mountain and listened to him speak. And so I brought my copy of his book, Black Power. And, and I listened to him. And he said some things, that really, really struck nerves for me. And one of the things, and the reason that I'm telling you this particular story, is he always referred to us as Africans. And I had never heard nobody do that, because, when I think about Africans, I think about the continent and people on the continent. But he was talking about Africans in the United States. So he helped to push my consciousness to a higher level by doing that. And I remember riding home on the bus, making a commitment that from this point forward, I will identify myself and my people as Africans. And so that was kind of like one of those watersheds, right, in the development of my consciousness as well. And then the final thing that I want to say, my senior year, I read an article by this journalist named Eric Norden on the assassination of Malcolm X. And that article helped to spark, because remember, I've always been studying Malcolm. I had read every book. By then, I'd read every book and article or anything that was on Malcolm X. If I found it, I read it. So I was pretty much on top of everything Malcolm. But this particular article, and remember, I had read stuff before that dealt with assassination. There was an article in Jet Magazine, and what was that published? October 1965 that dealt with Malcolm's assassination. So it wasn't like I hadn't been reading about Malcolm's assassination. Earl Grant wrote a real, powerful piece in Malcolm X, the Man in His Times, that dealt with, it was entitled the Last Days of Malcolm X. That dealt primarily, with the assassination. It wasn't that I hadn't been dealing with the assassination, but I read this article and it forced me to ask a lot of questions. And so I tell this story to make this point. That was, I guess you could say, the beginning of my commitment to find out who assassinated Malcolm X. And so from that point forward, any opportunity to write research, to do research, to, like even simple things. Like I'll never forget, I was taking a speech class my senior year, and a public speaking class. And every speech I gave, even though, you're supposed to do different levels, like informative, persuasive, and all of that, I never cared about what titles they gave the type of speech. Every speech I gave was a persuasive speech. And every opportunity, I talked about Malcolm X. And the last two was about Malcolm's assassination. So that was basically, in many ways, that spring of my last year is when I made that commitment that I was going to focus primarily on Malcolm's assassination, as one of my major, academic and political pursuits.
Right on. They say we get involved one of three ways in movement and struggle: either inspiration, aspiration, or desperation. And we can see clearly that you were inspired, and that's a beautiful thing because of the fact that it's we don't often talk about how we got to the point of where we are. So we definitely appreciate you sharing that piece. I want to talk a little bit about Malcolm pre Nation of Islam. You know what I'm saying? Malcolm, the early Malcolm. In your studies and your research, what were some of the most intriguing things that you found out about Malcolm prior to his consciousness, quote unquote?
Yeah, in some ways, I guess you could say, for me anyway, Malcolm was kind of like a typical, a typical hood. Malcolm was a hood. He got over on people, as best he could. He got involved in, activities that this society would call illegal. And he was about exploiting people. He didn't necessarily have much compassion when it came to people. If he had a mark, he hit that mark hard, and he never really looked back, it appears, and stuff like that. And I think that knowing these things about Malcolm, and then his transformation, as he became more spiritual, as he became more religious, as he became more political, I think that adds in many ways to Malcolm, to the saga, to the uniqueness, if you will, of a Malcolm X, because that here's a man who 10 years earlier probably could have cut somebody's throat and kept it moving. Now this is the same brother, whose commitment to building the nation and to African people, was on that other extreme. So I think that in many ways, I think the extremism, if you will, of a Malcolm X, or of a Malcolm Little prior to becoming a Malcolm X, I think that was always intriguing to me. Like, for example, dealing with white women. Malcolm Little deals with white women, has white girlfriends and white prostitutes, and part of his team were basically white women. But then Malcolm X, one of the last groups that you would ever expect to see with Malcolm X was a white woman. And not only that, but it was always ironic that a lot of brothers and sisters, particularly celebrities, and some civil rights leaders, they were married to white women, and it was always intriguing to me. Like, I remember, back in the day, I remember, reading, and don't ask me what the source was because that was a while ago, but J.A. Rogers, who I was introduced to by Malcolm X, right? Joel Augustus, Rogers, he was a Jamaican historian, right. A Garveyite. I think he grew up with Garvey. Certainly, without question, in my mind, one of our greatest historians, because very few people did the research, during his lifetime that J.A. Rogers did, to uncover, the history of the Negro, as he referred to us before he died in the mid-1960s. But anyway, Malcolm went to see J.A. Rogers one day, and J.A. Rogers, was married to a white woman, Helga. In fact, she published his books after he died. Rogers died, I think, 1965 or 1966. I think he died in 1966. But anyway, so when Malcolm apparently didn't know he was married to a white woman. So before he came to the apartment, J. Rogers had his wife hide in the closet. And so during their meeting, Malcolm could hear stuff because he's later going to tell this story to Betty, right? So he hears this, he hears, noise here and there and this and that, and da, 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 da. So he knew something was going on in the closet. And I think ultimately, she either she accidentally opened it or she purposely opened it because she was having a problem breathing or something like that. And so Malcolm realized, that he was hiding his white wife from him.
Wow.
And so
my son in the closet, huh?
Right, in the closet. But I tell the story to me because it kind of accents in many ways the extreme levels that you find with a Malcolm X. Because remember, go backwards, 10 years, 15 years earlier, and Malcolm was J.A. Rogers and that white woman.
Right.
And now, you got someone like a J.A. Rogers thinking so highly of a Malcolm X and thinking that him being with that white woman is, would be, unacceptable to a Malcolm X, is willing to basically put his wife in a situation like that. And I think only someone, who has went through those types of extremes, even though, of course, at the time, most people didn't know that Malcolm had those types of experiences and stuff. Certainly, J.A. Rogers wouldn't have known that. Probably people in the nation, because sometimes he would talk about his past and stuff like that. But J.A. Rogers wouldn't know, that you don't have to be hiding. Malcolm used to be with white women too. You don't have to keep your woman in the closet. But Malcolm had that type of persona that people like a J.A. Rogers thought it would be, thought that it was appropriate to deal with him on a level like that. And I just think that in so many ways, that was the uniqueness, if you will, of a Malcolm X. We had never really seen a Malcolm X on that level. Yeah, we had Garveys and we had, people, in the same plane. But Malcolm was different. And I think I recognized that, at a young age, when I first started reading autobiography, and then after I started reading some of the other books, it was like I knew that this was something different, that Malcolm was something special. His level of consciousness, which I think, as I look back on it, it was his level of consciousness more than anything else that drew me to his story. Because I can remember, when I was reading the autobiography, I can remember saying to myself, and then when I read Malcolm X Speaks, wow, how come I didn't think like that? Why didn't I see that? How come I didn't have that type of sensitivity in my analysis? See, people who force me to ask questions like that, those are the people who basically take me to new levels. Right. If I can just share this real quick with you.
Oh, absolutely. We honor, brother. Rock with us.
Okay. I have, as far as Africans in the United States, right, there are 6 watershed books that have influenced and basically, helped to change my consciousness, on different levels. One of the books, of course, was the autobiography of Malcolm X, which challenged me to start developing a more African-centered, universe.
Right.
After that, I read a book that helped with my gender consciousness, because one of the things that I realized when I was in college is that as much as I had developed a racial consciousness, I was very undeveloped when it came to a gender consciousness. And not only that, but I really had a exploitative, misogynistic in many ways consciousness when it came to sisters, because I came up viewing sisters, as some, as people to be conquered. When I was in college, my nickname, me and my best friend, we were like roommates for about 2 years and stuff. his nickname was the slut, and my nickname was the whore. And we took pride. We took pride in that. You understand what I'm saying?
You know,
being with as many sisters as we could be with. Why? Because I was undeveloped when it came to a gender consciousness. So I read Michelle Wallace's book, about the black macho in the midst of the superwoman, that thing. I read that. And that book, I had some issues with it, no doubt. But that book forced me to start developing a gender consciousness. And so that was one of those watersheds, it was, and it was a tough read. And, she was critical of a lot of, African leaders, including, Malcolm, as far as the whole gender consciousness and stuff like that was concerned. But I listened and I read, and I began to realize that I needed some work. There was some work that I had to do when it came to gender, because as the Black feminist said, in the Black feminist in 1974, I think it was Barbara Harris, but she said that you cannot liberate half of a nation. So it's like we as African men, we can't talk about liberating our people, if we're putting the emphasis on liberating the African man. So all of this stuff resonated with me. And like the autobiography of Malcolm X, forced me to a greater consciousness. The next important watershed for me, I read Hakeem Adaboudi's Enemies, The Clash of Races. That came out in 1978. Very important book. And particularly for someone like me where I was, because what he basically, he focused on, on developing, African thought to a level that I'd never really thought about before. And like it was with Malcolm, like it was with Michelle Wallace, it's like forced me to ask the question, damn, why didn't I think of that? How did I miss that? Dang, oh man, so anyway, very important. And then another book that he wrote, From Planet to Planet, also had a similar impact, even though I don't count that as one of my, Then after that, I read Toni Morrison's book, Song of Solomon. Now, let me say for the record, I seldom had time for novels, because to me, if I got to choose between reading something that deals with something historic, something that deals with our struggle, something that deals with race or something like that over a novel, I ain't going to read no damn novel.
Right.
But one summer, people had recommended it. I read Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. And this book was important for other reasons too, because what it did was she reminded me that struggle needed every type of weapon that we could provide it. And that art could as much be a weapon, just like Hakeem Adaboudi, Don L. Lee taught us that in his poetry, and Amir Baraka taught us that in his poetry, and Sonia Sanchez taught us that in her poetry. Song of Solomon taught me that novels can be as important a weapon as a Black Studies book. And what this sister did in that book was, she brought in culture. She brought in religion. She brought in struggle. I mean, she was able to basically mobilize all types of areas, in order to weave this storyline. And I began to appreciate it. The significance of that book there was that it broadened in many ways my understanding of struggle. It broadened for me the importance that art and whatever you bring to the table can basically raise your consciousness. And that's what that book did. Bell Hooks, I read, her book dealing with, what was it? Killing Memories, dealing with racism and stuff like that. And what Bell Hooks did for me was she took Michelle Wallace's analysis and she added some complexities that someone like me really needed to deal with. I needed to confront my own sexism. And in many ways, reading her books forced me to confront it. And not to mention the fact that her analysis, I mean, you talk about me asking the question, why didn't I think of this? You know, even her critique of capitalism took it to the next level and stuff like that. I mean, she made transition, some months ago, but that was a brilliant. Bell Hooks was a brilliant sister. That the analysis that woman gave, oh man, it just got like blew me away. And then of course Vincent Harding. I read There's a River, and that book, in many ways, it changed my life. There is a River. Came out in 1981. That book impacted me so much that I decided that I wanted to go to the University of Denver, and study under Vincent Harding for my doctorate. And I applied, I got accepted, all that. The only reason I ended up not going was because I didn't think he had, he wasn't as enthusiastic about me coming to study with him as I was, wanting to study with him. And then my grandfather, started getting sick, and I knew I needed to stay on the East Coast. And so there were some other factors and stuff. But There's a River. What really impacted me was his perspective. He began the book talking, like he's a historian, but he puts himself into the narrative. Right. So it's like his opening lines, he talks about, we were doing this and that when we first saw the ships, when we talking about African people and stuff. And he basically carries on that type of discourse for the entire book. And when I read that book, man, it was like, wow. So the importance for me is that he reminded me that, first off, this objectivity stuff that they try to teach you in school, history is supposed to be written objectively and all that. He threw that bullshit out the window. And so I threw that bullshit out the window as well. It was like, it changed my focus, because my thing is that I'm not trying to reach some imaginary, standard that white historians have created when it comes to understanding history, to studying history, to writing history. No, I'm not going to separate myself. I'm going to be part of the narrative. I'm going to speak as an African person. And so that was the significance for me of a Vincent Harding. And that's why I wanted to study with him, because previous people that I studied with, they were promoting that objectivity stuff. Even though white people ain't never tried to do the objectivity stuff when it comes to history, that was the goal that they wanted us to follow. And I couldn't go there, So anyway, these are watershed books that kind of changed, my analysis, changed my trajectory, kind of like put me on the path that I've, pretty much been following, for damn near 50 years or so.
Right on. I appreciate you sharing that, because of the fact that, we're usually hearing about the propaganda used against us. Folks don't talk about what motivates us. What are some of the tools? And I think that even when you talk about books, oftentimes we get caught up in like, oh, that did it for you, or that motivated you, or this, so on and so forth. Before you have a fire, there's a spark. And I think that we got to always remember that. I don't care if Franklin at Charlie Brown table motivated you. You know what I'm saying? Him being the only black boy at the table, whatever it takes to get you to where it is you need to go is what's important. We get caught up in absolutes. And the reality is there are no absolutes. And once we realize that there are no absolutes, except for the fact that capitalism is absolutely inherently evil, imperialism, Zionism, colonialism, etc. You know what I'm saying? But until we get clear on that, then we'll get, we'll be engaging in the sidetracking of the slave. So definitely I appreciate you giving us that meat, because of the fact that there's someone that's checking it out now.
Right. Yeah, Bob, if I just go back though, the question that you were asking me in reference to Malcolm, One of the things, though, that I think, really impressed me about Malcolm X, to kind of go back to the question in reference to, prior to him being Malcolm consciously, when he was basically Malcolm Little and basically a hood and stuff, is that Malcolm also taught us a valuable lesson that, it's okay to be where you are, to go to through the experiences that you go through, so long as you're able to utilize those experiences. In other words, it's okay for you to, to have to deal with lemons, as long as you can figure out a way to turn those lemons into lemonade. And I think that, to me, was one of the most unique features of a Malcolm X, is that he could go through those experiences, but what did he do with those experiences? He ended up using those experiences in order to improve himself, in order to improve his knowledge, in order to provide more understanding and more grounding in the things that he had to deal with in the future and stuff like that. And the other thing is that, and he never apologized for his background. Malcolm's, I think the honesty in Malcolm's autobiography, that is, he basically giving you his story, but he's not trying to chocolate coat it. Most people say sugar coat. I say chocolate coat, but he's not trying to chocolate coat it. He's telling you as he remembered it. He may have taken, here and there, some poetic license here and there, but for the most part, he's giving you an accurate portrait of how he saw his universe, how he saw his life, and he wasn't trying to apologize. He wasn't trying to lighten the blow or make himself come out looking better and stuff. That's self-criticism. And I think that self-criticism was one of the other valuable lessons that I learned from Malcolm's life, is that it's okay to be able to look yourself in the mirror and see what's there instead of just seeing what you hope to be there. Malcolm could do that. And, he could self-reflect, and more importantly, he could learn from the self-reflection and therefore help you to learn from the self-reflection and stuff. So those were some of the things that, that I think help explain why Malcolm, why I was drawn to Malcolm more than I was drawn to, say, some other people, who I read, who I studied.
Let me ask you this, because you definitely, your point is on target. Because so many of us, Malcolm has been like, to many of us, we have Garvey as the great grandfather, and Malcolm as the grandfather, and the Panthers as as the grandmothers and grandfathers, so on and so forth. And it is through that self-criticism you talked about that gave us a inroad, a light down the tunnel, because so many of us have gone down the quote unquote wrong path. But most Africans you talk to that are involved in any type of revolutionary work, particularly nationalists or Pan-Africanists, they mention Malcolm because of the fact that he was, like I said, he was the man with the, as Imam Jamil Al-Amin, formerly H. Rap Brown, would say, the man with the muscle in his voice. He had the ability to command respect just based off of his being, his existence. How important to you in your mind, how important was it for there to be a Detroit Red? Because again, we went from Malcolm Little, and they talk about how his parents were Garveyites and his father's role, so on and so forth. And then Detroit Red, it's like, it's this ugly spot and stain where, he messed with white women. He was involved in drugs. He was a petty thief. For all practical purposes, he was a parasite. But how important was it for there to be a Detroit Red?
Right. I think it was vital for the man that Malcolm became that he went through all of the different levels, of challenges, that he went through. And think about it. It gave him, it broadened in so many ways his perspective. It gave him experiences that down the road he could tap into. But it also gave him a language. Like he talks about this in the chapter 1965 in the autobiography. He talks about how his experiences equipped him to be able to walk down the street in Harlem and hear, listen to what people are saying and be able to understand it, be able to appreciate it, be able to, to know what they're saying versus some other civil rights leaders at the time who walking down there, they would need a translator. Right. Malcolm never needed a translator when it came to talking to his people, particularly urbanites, urban Africans, right, because that is, that is his universe. That's where he came from. And so it gave Malcolm experiences. It gave Malcolm resources, for example, that a Martin Luther King, who was raised middle class, would have never been able to, to necessarily experience. But right. Malcolm experienced it. And it reminds me of an African proverb. Only he who has crossed the river can say that the crocodile has a lump on its snout.
That's right.
Only he who has crossed the river can say that the crocodile has a lump on its snout. Malcolm could talk about that crocodile snout, whereas a lot of other people, because they didn't have those experiences, they couldn't. He could also talk about, like, for example, when Malcolm talked about some of the urban explosions, in the United States, during the 1960s and stuff, he always talked to you from the perspective of the African who is basically in the middle of it, the African who is facilitating it, because he understood their anger. He understood their experiences. Very few leaders of that era looked at it like that. In fact, most of our leaders, they looked at it from the standpoints of the enemy. We're, in there, we're being violent to our own communities and all this, like, you're going to break that, all the, all of the crime. Progress we've made is going to be transformed because of what y'all are doing in the streets and all that stuff. Malcolm understood the anger. Malcolm's thing was, we got to figure out ways to redirect it, but that anger is legitimate.
That's right.
That, that those thoughts, that those actions, they are legitimate and stuff. But see, other leaders, they couldn't do that. So no, to go back to your question, those experiences equipped him. And I think about this. I think this is one of the reasons why we do hold Malcolm in many ways in greater esteem, because we know where he came from. We know that he went from these different levels, and that along the way, we also know Malcolm was a scholar. Malcolm was constantly feeding his mind. Malcolm knew that the mind is a muscle, and you got to exercise that muscle to maximize it. And so Malcolm's constantly, so he got all these experiences, as the book said, he rose from hoodlum, thief, dope peddler, pimp. He got all these experiences. And at the same time, Malcolm could go and have, conversations, with the most elites of the elites. So all of these things in many ways made Malcolm special. It made Malcolm more unique, than the vast majority of our other, leaders and stuff, because of these experiences. So yeah, but he needed those experiences. And I think that without those experiences, without Detroit Reds, I don't think we would have had a Malcolm X. We needed those experiences for there to be a Malcolm X.
That's right. And I love the fact that you're pointing out basically that not only did Malcolm have his finger on the pulse of the streets, because so many of our quote unquote activists and freedom fighters now to this very day, they don't have their finger on the pulse of the streets. They don't know what's going on in the community. They don't go to the hood. They never been to the hood, so on and so forth, but are quick to come up with town hall meetings and do all these different virtual meetings about what should happen and what the people in the community need, so on and so forth. And they don't really touch down in the hood. They go to the safest of spots. One thing about Detroit Red, he before even becoming Malcolm, he had and even after becoming Malcolm, he had what we call a hood pass. Many of us can go anywhere around the world,
right,
by ourselves, and we good. Not because of the fact that you tough, not because you look in no certain way, but your spirit and your energy lets people know and reminds them that you belong wherever you are. You know what I'm saying? And that was a powerful attribute with Malcolm. But I want to talk about the death of Detroit Red and the resurrection of Malcolm, because when we talk about Malcolm, I think that most people forget that he was Detroit Red longer than he was Malcolm. He was Malcolm Little in Detroit Red longer than he was Malcolm. You're talking about he joined the Nation of Islam, or was introduced to the Nation of Islam when he was in prison. What was that, like 54, 56? What was that?
No, earlier than that.
Earlier than that?
Okay. Yeah. Let me see. He was probably around 51-ish.
51. Okay. So he was assassinated in 65.
Mm-hmm.
So for all practical purposes, we're talking about 14 years of becoming Malcolm and becoming the man who we know him as the man he is today, the man we recognize today, in 14 short years out of his 39-year span. You know what I'm saying? He was able to become that. I want to, what was that impact, and what was your how important, shall I say? And I know this question may sound basic, but how important was the Nation of Islam's teachings when it came to Malcolm, or the influence? How important was that when it came to
right? Yeah,
the building of it?
Right. I think that the Nation of Islam, it was significant. It was vital. I think it was timely. Malcolm and the Nation happened at a very crucial time, but at a very necessary time. And I've always been clear on the fact that Malcolm needed the Nation to the same extent that the Nation needed someone like a Malcolm.
Right. And
it was a powerful marriage, when it lasted. And let's be real clear, Malcolm, and I talk about this in my book, Malcolm needed Elijah Muhammad's wisdom. He needed Elijah Muhammad's experience. He needed Elijah Muhammad's teachings. He needed Elijah Muhammad's mentorship and his paternalism. Malcolm needed all of that to the same, and to the same extent, the Nation needed Malcolm's youth. The Nation needed Malcolm's diligence. The Nations needed Malcolm's, hold no prisoners mentality that, hey, we should have 1,000 more. I'm going to make sure we get 1,000 more. They needed that type of confidence. They needed someone who could articulate, who could take some of Elijah Muhammad, because let's be honest, Elijah Muhammad wasn't the most articulate speaker, nor was he the best writer. Sometimes it was a struggle reading Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm helped to correct some of those deficiencies, some of those defects. And so it was an incredible marriage, while it lasted, and both of them, they fed off each other. Both of them needed each other. One without the other, we would not have had a Malcolm and an Elijah. But the two feeding off of each other, we had a Malcolm and we had an Elijah. That was, and let's be clear, you cannot separate the person who became Malcolm X from the Nation of Islam. That was a marriage, and it had to happen. And we're playing with history. It would be ahistorical to try to figure out, well, what if Malcolm hadn't hooked up with Elijah Muhammad? Or what if Elijah Muhammad hadn't hooked up with Malcolm? Where would blah, 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 blah? That's an intellectual debate. We just wasting our time.
Right.
So no, it needed to happen, and you cannot minimize the marriage between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad, and Malcolm and the Nation of Islam, and Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. You can't minimize it. And I think in the interest of our people, it was good that it happened. We needed that relationship to happen. And it was for the betterment. The tragedy of all of this was how that relationship ended. That's the tragedy.
Right on.
And that's the atrocity in all of this.
Right on. Let's wrap about international Malcolm. One beautiful thing is I think he took a page from folks like Paul Robeson's book, being able to go abroad and get a clearer understanding of the workings of the world, because he moved from I dare to say encapsulated situation to a more broader thinking situation. I remember listening to some audio about when he was talking about how he would listen to how he got his speaking style, his speaking pattern from Paul Robeson. He talked about how he would sit in a cell for hours and listen to Paul Robeson, and he to a degree mimic his speaking style. Did you speak anything on that, or or is it something that I'm just
no, actually I don't recall that, but okay. That's okay, Baba. I would certainly trust you on that.
Right on. And I'm trying to think, because it was long ago. I'm not sure if it was actually me hearing him say that or someone. It was. I remember it was something on the radio, and it was a long talk about it. So I'd have to look it up. I don't want to.
Right. And see, for a question like that, that would be the type of question that I would have to defer to Brother Paul Lee, because Paul would be able to pull that one up without jumping through no hoops and stuff like that. Whereas somebody like me, and particularly as I've gotten a little bit older and stuff, I would really have to do a little research of that one.
Hey, I respect it. You see, I like to be clear, and shout out to Brother Paul Lee and Peter Goldman. For folks who missed that particular episode a few months ago, we talked about the assassination of Malcolm and a little bit more of his history, and Peter Goldman's meeting him and interviewing him, and Paul's extensive research. And Paul, of course, speaks highly of Baba Zac Kondo, and he says that the book you wrote was, is probably the foremost, the best research. I don't want to jack his words up because I don't want no problems with Brother Paul, but definitely, he suggested, strongly urged me to interview you a while back. So definitely shout out to them. I want to,
and let me just say this too, just in case Paul is listening too.
Yes.
That as I shared with you, Paul Lee is the most meticulous, the most skilled scholar and researcher that I've had the pleasure, and I've hooked up with a lot of our, scholars and researchers that I've ever had the pleasure of working with, and he made me a more meticulous, a more sensitive, a more detailed oriented scholar, when I was working on my Malcolm X book, because he would willingly, share information, and we were exchanging documents and FBI in particular and stuff like that. So it was a great collaboration when I was working on the Malcolm X assassination, and he made it a much better book because he forced me to be more sensitive, in my research. So I just wanted to say that publicly.
Right on. No, and I appreciate you saying that, because of the fact that, just to get Paul Lee and Peter on the screen, together or separately, was, man, it was like looking for the tooth fairy, so definitely, he's, I've learned a lot from him in our short time communicating, and just the emails, so on and so forth. But yeah, so definitely.
And you know what? Let me say this too about Peter Goldman. I'm critical of Peter Goldman in my Malcolm X book, which I'm in the process, by the way, of revising, and hopefully it'll be ready by this summer. I've been adding some stuff, and it's, trying to be meticulous, like my brother, Paul be insistent and stuff. Man, this shit takes a lot of time. So let me just say that for the record. But I quoted Peter Goldman more than anybody else in my book, but it wasn't all critical quotes. Like for example, when Peter talked about the impact that Mecca had on Malcolm X, I always thought, I quoted that in my book because I thought that he penetrated it to the essence, because basically he said that, that basically Malcolm buried the devil in Mecca, and that white people henceforth simply became no longer the devil. They simply became the enemy. I mean, that is a very perceptive assessment and a penetrating assessment of Malcolm's, of the impact of Mecca. And so I also quoted, Peter on those levels too. So I'm saying that to say that, I appreciate the research of Peter, even though we came from two different perspectives. He came from the perspective of a white liberal, right, when he wrote his first, few editions, and I came from the perspective, of a black nationalist, of a Pan-Africanist, of what Hakeem Adabudi calls a liberated intellectual. So we were definitely gonna, bump heads, right. And he came from perspective then of really, thinking that the system worked, that these white detectives and these white cops and the FBI, when they interviewed him, that they would be on the level and stuff. Whereas I'm coming from the standpoint that they're lying their asses off, and you can't trust none of them. Right. So those are just some of the simplistic differences and stuff.
Right on. No, and I'm glad that you said that too, because folks, when you say the white man's the devil, right? I tell folks all the time, man. I don't think that the white man's the devil, because I don't think that the devil got anything on the white man. The devil's overrated and the white man's underrated. So I don't think, I don't. So I can agree with you on that. So we can all get together on that one. On the international level, how important was that, those travels? Because again, we talk about these stages and these levels, and I'm asking these questions because some folks think they know, and so I want to go to folks who I want to tap into yours, and what's your thoughts based on your research, and what was the most intriguing thing that you found about his traveling during your research?
Okay, well, first off, I think that Malcolm's travels, were quite significant, even though maybe not in the way that most people, particularly those who are limited to the autobiography, think. Like for example, this notion that Malcolm goes to Mecca in April 1964 and he realizes that white people can come, that Muslims of all this and all that. It's like people forget that in July 1959, Malcolm went to Mecca. Now, he didn't make Hajj, but he went to Mecca. There was very little that Malcolm hadn't seen in 1959. that he saw in 1964. So I don't necessarily buy into, too much of that, how shocked and, and the new world opened up and all that. I think Malcolm was much more schooled than that. Malcolm was much more experienced and seasoned to know that white people could go to Mecca, and that he didn't need to go in 1964 to basically, figure that out. Right. But to me, what I always found most significant about Malcolm's travels in 1964, was that it did open up a new world as far as Africa is concerned, as far as the Islamic world is concerned. It basically introduced Malcolm to the extent that he had experiences, particularly on the continent, that he had never had before. Right. And so I think that broadened Malcolm's scope. And particularly as he met with different leaders, particularly the African leaders on the political level. Because remember this, when, in my studies of Malcolm, my primary focus was on the political side of his travels, because those were the sides that are going to contribute to his assassination. And so I was particularly, for example, interested when he met with Nkrumah, when he met with Sekou Touré, when he met with African leaders who, he was trying to promote his UN, project with, and, what some of their responses were. Because one thing is clear, none of them signed on, to be the sponsor of his UN project.
Right.
So obviously, even some of the African leaders who you thought would have been the most interested, maybe they considered it, maybe they pondered it, but certainly by the time of Malcolm's death, they had made no commitment to do that. And I think that there was, on that level, I think that there were some disappointments, if you will, on Malcolm's part, in that he looked to African leaders as basically having the back of Africans in the diaspora, and specifically Africans in the United States. And I think that the record seems to be clear that, he was disappointed, particularly when it came to people who he would talk about previously, as if they were, obviously they were on his pedestal. Like, for example, I think Kenyatta disappointed Malcolm, quite a bit. When he was there during his stay, I think as Malcolm began to see the role that he was letting, Brits play in his government, just different things like that. I think one of the significant things for a Malcolm X going to Africa in 1964 is that it opened up, if you will, it opened up his perspective to the degree that he began to get a more realistic portrait of the role that colonialism was still playing in Africa, even in those countries that he had the most hope in. Colonialism was still alive and well, or I guess it was neo-colonialism, but it's alive and well. And I think that all those things, forced Malcolm to take another take, on what is needed, if you will, to empower Africa, from the 60s, 40s, forward, and so I think that was very important for Malcolm's education.
Sure.
And we always want and need our leaders, to continue their education, and obviously I'm not talking about that school. I'm not talking about school bullshit. I'm talking about education as far as life, as far as politics, as far as culture. We always want our leaders to grow. And I think, going, because remember, Malcolm was in Africa and Asia for 24 weeks in 1964. That's most of the year.
Right.
And so he's going to be equipped with some experiences, that I guess the tragedy is that he's not going to live long enough or too much beyond those experiences so that he could have utilized them more as far as our struggle, as far as our knowledge, as far as taking us where we need to go. He just didn't have that much time, and so we could speculate, had Malcolm lived, how would those experiences have influenced this or influenced that or taken him here or taken him there? It's not much we can do with that, at this stage. But clearly going, and then the other thing that I always thought was important, Malcolm went to Africa. Not all of our leaders,
that's right,
focus on Africa. In fact, particularly with the civil rights leaders, you could hear some of them, and they're talking about Europe right, the way they should be talking about Africa. So Malcolm understood when a lot of others didn't, that it had to be Africa. Africa had to be front seat.
Right.
Now, because he was Muslim, he still, had his flirtation, if you will, with the Islamic world. Even though I think that going to the Islamic world also helped Malcolm, giving him a more realistic portrait, for example, of how Arabs dealt with Africans, in the Islamic world and stuff like that. He needed those experiences as well, because I think in the end, Malcolm came to see, that Sunni Islam, just like white Christianity, had its contradictions, had its racial, had its cultural, injustices. And I think that was something that Malcolm needed to know as well.
Right on. I think that it's also important to note that, just naming some of the heads of state that you talked about, Nkrumah, and even folks like Castro, the fact that Malcolm was accepted and given an audience by these heads of states, and he wasn't a head of state himself, is that's a feat. Of course, we see later on, Minister Huey P. Newton and Eldridge and folks like that following that lead and that tradition. But and not only that, the majority of these leaders were so young. We're talking about Patrice Lumumba being 36 when he was assassinated. You know what I mean? You're talking about Malcolm being 39 and Martin being 39 and Frantz Fanon transitioning at 36 and just so many others who never made it. Che Guevara, 39 years old, so on and so forth. So we're talking about, for all practical purposes, youth. You know what I mean? You're talking about, the majority of us, I have children in their 30s. You know what I mean? So the majority of us these days, we don't even, I would argue that we don't even truly enter manhood to about 40 years old. You know what I'm saying? You're a man, you get an understanding, you're clear about certain things, but as you grow, So, Malcolm hadn't even made that full transition. And we can't, again, it would be asinine to speculate on whether or not, where would he be today, and would Malcolm be for voting, all the other craziness. That's just as insane as hell to me when people talk like that. But, just remembering the age and the fact we talked about, him being into quote unquote consciousness or being on the right side of things for 14 years. I want to
let me say one thing, though, Baba,
yes,
to kind of vegetable back on something you were saying.
Okay.
When Malcolm was in some of the countries, he was treated like he was a head of state.
Right.
And not only that, but he was given the types of perks and resources like a chauffeur and bodyguards and different things like that when he was in several countries. They did it. For example, Sekou Touré comes to mind off the top of my head. He gave Malcolm, actually, I think he gave Malcolm 2 security people. I think one was an officer. He let him stay at Malcolm's villa. At his villa. He gave him a chauffeur. He basically, you know, he gave him a chef. He gave Malcolm the type of respect that would have normally been reserved for a head of state. And I think that, to me, the significance of that is that even though not all of the leaders, and Faisal did the same thing in Saudi Arabia, not all of the leaders, you know, clearly viewed Malcolm, you know, as a head of state. But it's real clear that, you know, when he was outside of this country, you know, some of these leaders had a very high opinion of him and where he was at that stage, you know, in his life. And then the other thing too is that this whole youth thing, I think that we really underestimate, you know, how some of these, you know, like, you know, because we would assume that people like some of the giants that you named, we would assume that they were older than their years, simply because of who they were, how they carried themselves, what they had accomplished, and stuff like that.
Right.
But you're right. You know, we're talking about in the larger scheme of things, these men were babies,
right?
And yet, you know, to be where they were at, right. And unfortunately, for pretty much all of them, you know, they never went past those, you know, that whole 30, you know, the whole 40 mark. They never made it. And of course, it forces us to just marvel. Imagine if this brother or that brother, you know, had lived longer. What else could we have expected and stuff like that? But no, that's an important point.
Right. No doubt. Now it brings Chairman Fred to mind as well. You know, 21 years old. You know,
unbelievable.
Yeah. And we talk about, you know, and George Jackson, 29. These are folks who, you know, we revere, and that is why we say elders for counsel, youth for war. It doesn't mean that you know the youth are being dismissed. It means that, you know, oftentimes you played this game already. You know what I'm saying? You know the play. You know where they're gonna come from. You know what time they're gonna throw the water. You know what time. You know what I'm saying? You know what the hits feel like. You know, you fresh on the field. You ain't never got hit before. You know, you get that concussion, you might quit. You know what I'm saying? But this what come with the game. This what come with sport. So oftentimes you need the elders for advice. I want to talk about your book, Conspiracies, Unraveling the Assassination of Malcolm X. What prompted you to write it, and give us a you know, a synopsis of you know, what is it? What, you know, why should folks check that out? I mean, you know, Manning Marable has a book. Why don't we read that one? I'm just messing with you. Let's talk about your book, and we're gonna touch on Manning as well, by the way. But
okay. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. When we were talking about, when I read that the Norton article, was that when we were off the air or on the air? Were we on the air?
You know, I think you might have been off the air. I think you was off the air, if I'm not mistaken. But it's not gonna hurt. You just go on into it, and but okay. I think it was off the air, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Yeah. So what had happened was, in my senior year in college, I read a article by Eric Norton that dealt with the assassination of Malcolm X. And it, you know, and remember, I had already, you know, read different things about Malcolm's assassination, but, you know, but reading this article, for some reason, something happened. And what it was, I have no idea. All I can tell you is, after I read that article, I started thinking more seriously about figuring out, you know, trying to resolve this question, because it was real clear that at that stage, we really didn't know who really killed Malcolm. You know, yeah, we had people in prison and all of that. We had the official version and all of that, but it just seemed like it was more complex than that. And that's what that Eric Norton article reminded me of. So all I can tell you is that starting that spring in my senior year, I started allocating time and resources looking into Malcolm's assassination. And every opportunity, when I was in classes, you know, I used, you know, I don't care what the class was. When I was in school, I would try to gear it all toward something that interests me as an African person.
I know.
So it might be a PE class to somebody, damn it, but I'm gonna figure out a way to weave in my history or African people or Malcolm or somebody into that class if I got a project to do. And so that's what started happening. In speech class, I started, dealing with Malcolm's assassination and political science classes and social science classes. And so when I graduated, I knew that that's what I wanted to study when I went to the next level, when I went to grad school. So when I went to grad school, and let me just share this because I don't know if I've ever even talked about this publicly, but a watershed for me. Okay. I was taking a class and I decided that I was going to write a seminar paper. It was a seminar history class. And I said I was going to do it on Malcolm's assassination. So I ended up writing this 36-page seminar paper on Malcolm's assassination. And I tapped quite a bit from Eric Norden and a few other, articles and books that I had been reading and stuff like that. And so I decided after that paper that I was going to use that paper would be the foundation for my thesis, that this is what I wanted to study for my major project, in my program. And so I went to a conference, me and two other brothers, we went to a conference. This was in 1983. It was the regional conference in Chicago for the National Council for Black Studies. And I went to this conference, and it was like a who's who of Black study pioneers, of serious scholars and stuff. And I got an opportunity to meet a lot of them. And what ended up happening was when I would talk to people, I would tell them that I'm writing, a thesis on Malcolm's assassination. And I remember talking to some people, and I had there was an instance where there was a line of about 2 or 3 brothers, and these are serious brothers, waiting to talk to me so that they can give me some type of direction, because they knew through this person or that person or overheard this or that I was doing this thing on Malcolm X. And I'm talking about people who I had a notebook and I was constantly writing down stuff. They were giving me people to talk to, like people that I remember. Leonard Jeffries was there, and he's going to put me in contact with, let me see. He put me in contact with James Smalls, who put me in contact with Ella, Malcolm's sister, Ella Collins. I talked to Baraka. James Turner was particularly helpful for me. He gave me names and phone numbers of people who I needed to talk to. You need to talk to Gil Nobles. I'll give you his phone number. Tell him that I told him, told you to call him. You need to talk to, what was that brother that did the Malcolm and Martin? Woody, for some reason, I want to say Woody Strode, but Woody Strode was an actor, former athlete and stuff. So it's not Woody Strode. Woody King, it was like I got names for all these, people to talk to, and a couple of people who were at the Audubon. I got names from these other, from these older seasoned scholars and stuff, because their thing was, we want to make sure that we give you good direction. It was like they mentored me in the beginnings, by giving, by kind of opening it up and giving me direction and stuff and saying, use my name. When you contact them, feel free to say, I gave them the number to call you and stuff like that. So anyway, that was a very important episode, in my studies, because in many ways, that kind of got me started. And so after that, I made a special trip to go to New York. One of the good things is that, when I was in grad school, I had scholarships that basically gave me money monthly, after all my bills and stuff were paid. And so it gave me resources that a lot of grad students didn't have. So they used to have this airlines called People's Express.
Wow.
And it flew out of Dulles Airport in DC. And I would drive up to Dulles Airport. In those days, People Express cost $19 to fly from Dulles, which is Northern Virginia, the DC area,
right,
to Newark.
Wow, $19.
$19, and then it went up.
Did they have you on the wing or what?
Huh?
They had you on the wing or what was going on? $19.
But you know what? But it was cool. And so I did that several times during my research on Malcolm. I would fly to New York. I had relatives in New York. I always had places to stay and stuff. And I would spend like a day or two, sometimes going to stores. Like, I never forget, I went to this store. In those days, they were still selling tapes, the little cassette tapes.
Cassette tapes, right.
I would go into a store where you could hear them playing tapes like Malcolm X and, different people like that. I would go in there just hoping that maybe somebody there could give me some direction, because obviously there's some, obviously they're selling these things and they, it's political. Right. They're selling Malcolm X tapes and stuff. I went to this one time, it was a brother named James Payne. He owned the place. And he listened, I was talking to him and, told him what I was trying to do. He listened to me. And then, I come to find out that he was at the assassination of Malcolm X. Wow. One thing, though, that I did learn real quickly, people would test you. They wanted to make sure that you were who you said you were.
That's right.
Because, and it's based on experience, because, we've had enemies of our people who have played games with us. So they want to make sure before they open up any types of can of worms. So I had to kind of get used to that at first, because they're going to test you and they want to know. And how do I know what you say? If I call this person, what are they going to say to me? Blah, 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 stuff like that. So these were just some of the things that I learned, as a neophyte, researcher, because I ain't learned none of this stuff when I was in school. I had to learn this stuff on my own. And then the other thing that I also remember, there was a brother. They were already going to the Audubon. I mean, to the Ferncliff Cemetery, for Malcolm's, commemoration. And Ella told me this story. I know about 4 people told me this story, so I'm pretty sure it was pretty accurate. But this is the story that they told me, and this was their way of saying to me, "You be careful, young brother." They said that there was a young brother. They said he was about 16, 17 years old. And they said that when they were at the Ferncliff Cemetery on Malcolm's birthday, I want to say in the early 70s, like maybe 70, 71, something like that. They said this young brother, he pledged that he would not rest until Malcolm's killers were found. And they said he took some type of like a silver bullet or some type of bullet, and he put it on the gravesite. And, and he did this in front of people. And what they told me was, like, shortly after that, this brother was found shot. And keep this in mind now. We're talking about the early 70s. Malcolm's killers are still across the river in Newark. Now, is there a connection? Do I know anything about? I don't have nothing. I can't even tell you the brother's name. They don't remember the brother's name either. But they told me the story because they wanted me to be careful.
Like, don't get it twisted. It's real.
Exactly. Right. That what they were basically saying to me was, what you're embarking upon is not to be taken lightly. And it seemed like you're a serious young brother. So you need to make sure you carry you cover your back. That's what I got from this. And, in line with this, I never forget, when I was still doing, my Malcolm research, but the book hadn't come out yet, right? I never forget, one night I get a phone call. and it's Leonard Jeffries, at City College.
Right on.
And so this was probably around, I want to say this was probably around 91, 92. And at that stage of the game, I was already being criticized by, some of the people in the nation, some of the local ministers here and stuff like that. So I was, they be selling whip tickets, about, they knew that my book was going to be coming out soon and he's going to try to argue that the nation killed Malcolm and, all that type of stuff. Plus I had given lectures and been on radio and stuff like that. So they kind of like knew I was out there. So I get a phone call from Leonard Jeffries, and it was probably around 11:30. So, it was kind of like late. And I get this phone call, and he says, Brother Zach, this is Leonard Jeffries. How you doing? I said, I'm good. What's up? He said that they had been hearing stuff in New York, and this is the nationalist Pan-African community, that they had been hearing stuff that the nation was going to move on me. And he wanted to make sure that I was okay. Well, I hadn't heard anything or anything like that, but, and everything was cool. But here's the thing, though. The fact that I had to get phone calls like that, the fact that there was ideals floating like that, even if it's just a rumor and stuff, we should never have put ourselves, I'm talking about we as African people, shouldn't have never put ourselves in a situation in which thoughts like that had to be considered, had to be on somebody's radar. The possibility that, because I'm researching, one of our own, we got groups who have problems with that and might want to do something to me type of stuff. That's the ultimate contradiction in this whole Malcolm thing is that we, have groups that go after our own, but not necessarily the enemy. That contradiction, it still bothers me, that contradiction.
Oh yeah, definitely. And we appreciate you sharing it. And shout out to Dr. Leonard Jeffries. We had him on Riot Starter TV last month. So if you all have missed the Dr. Leonard Jeffries interview, make sure you go back in the archives, either go to blackpowermedia.org and check that out, or you can go on the Black Power Media YouTube thing. I just wanted to plug Dr. Jeffries. I think he just turned 86 or 87 years old last month. So definitely, definitely shout out to him. Yes. And I'm trying to get Professor Small on as well because of the fact that we definitely appreciate his work. I want to, because you've been talking about the pink elephant in the room, as they say, or some people say the white elephant in the room. So I'm gonna just jump into it. From your research and your studies, point blank period, who killed Malcolm? Who assassinated Malcolm X?
Yeah. As an organization on the orders of Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam were the killers of Malcolm X. They were egged on, they were manipulated, they were schemed on by the FBI, but it was the Nation of Islam on Elijah Muhammad's orders that killed Malcolm X. And also we need to throw in the New York City Police Department and their, Red Squad, as they were called, their secret, intelligence unit known as BALSI, the Bureau of Special Services and Investigation. They lent a hand. And the short of things is that the enemy of our people, mainly the FBI, they knew that there was tension between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm and the family of Elijah Muhammad. And what our enemies did was they simply exploited those weaknesses. And then ultimately they let nature take its course. They exploited it as much as they needed to. And then the nation picked up basically, picked up the reins from that point forward, and then did what they ultimately did. And let me say this, less pain. Now, when I did my book in 1993, my hope was, there were still some people that I really had wanted to talk to who could shed some light on Malcolm's assassination. So my hope was, after I published my book, was that some other people, with the energy and with the commitment, with the commitment of a Zac Kondo and a Paul Lee, that they would then step in and kind of like take it to the next level, find some people who wanted to talk, maybe some of the old guard, they're dying, they're sick, they're willing to talk. And we didn't really see that up until a few years ago when Les Payne's book came out. Les Payne was able to do what I was not able to do. He found a couple insiders who were willing to talk. And three in particular. Two of them were people who periodically have said things over the years, but never to the extent that they told Les Payne. And we need to put it in context. When they talked to Les Payne, they were dying. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Joseph Shaw, who we knew as Captain Joseph Gavitt. And I'm talking about, Jeremiah Shabazz, who we knew as Jeremiah Pugh. Pugh had been he was the minister of the Atlanta Mosque, where y'all are, and then he became Mosque number 12, the Philadelphia Mosque, which is the probably the most gangster of all of, Newark and Philly were the most gangster of all of the NOI mosque. Wow. And so basically both of them talked to Payne. And then he also had a person who was part of the Goon Squad that was the group that ultimately had the responsibility of killing Malcolm. Roughly, it was a group of around 20 men, and the assassins came out of that crew. Mm-hmm. They were all FOI Newark, Mosque number 25. So Payne was able to talk to both Pugh and Captain Joseph when they were on their deathbeds. They had both been protecting protecting Elijah for the most part for the last, up until that time, let me see, Jeremiah died in 1998, Captain Joseph died in 1993. So up until those times, both of them were basically covering Elijah back. They might say, hey, look, the nation, participated, but they would always keep the distance from Elijah Muhammad. Well, on their deathbeds, neither one of them were basically saying that. They were basically saying that the orders came from Chicago. The orders came from Chicago. Joseph even, even though I think he had admitted this on the interview that he did with Spike too, that members of his squad bombed Malcolm's house the week before he was killed. Wow. But then when he's on his deathbed, he tells Les Payne, and I think, I respect Les Payne. I don't, he ain't making this stuff up. And basically, Joseph came clean, and he admitted that the nation not only bombed his house, but that they killed Malcolm. And Pugh basically did the same thing. Pugh also explained how Farrakhan ended up at Newark on the day of the assassination. And I think that that's his story, that you can basically bank on that. He basically said that, because everybody knows, well, if you don't know, Farrakhan spoke at Newark that afternoon, pretty much about the same time that Malcolm was being killed.
Wow.
No. It was later. Let me see. Malcolm was killed around 3. He hadn't spoken that. He spoke that evening. But here's the thing. And I talk about this in my book. I talk about how the FBI, launched an investigation to try to explain how it was that Lewis, in the early morning of the assassination, got up and drove from Boston to Newark. And they were trying to figure out, is there a connection between Malcolm's assassination and, Lewis being in Newark? Well, Farrakhan had over the years given different reasons as to why he spoke at Newark. First he says Elijah Muhammad, that at the time Ma 7 had a permanent minister, and so Elijah Muhammad was basically rotating people, and so it was his term for the rotation. Of course, the only problem with that though is that he couldn't notify his people that he was going to be gone, because he got that, he got the notice from Elijah Muhammad like like at the last moment. You understand what I'm saying? So obviously he wasn't scheduled to speak there, obviously. But according to Jeremiah, what Jeremiah basically said was, he said basically that Elijah Muhammad was a Machiavellian, and that people didn't know how political he was and how much he schemed. And he said that members of the high command of the nation still didn't trust Farrakhan because they thought that he was too close to Malcolm. And that according to Pew, according to Jeremiah, what Elijah Muhammad was doing was he ordered Lewis to Newark to speak because he wanted to bloody Lewis's hands. Meaning he sent him to Newark at the base of operation. Because remember, that day, the assassins, basically, the base of operation was the Newark Mosque. And so the major officials who are participating in Malcolm's assassination, they're all assembled at the Newark Mosque. And that's where Farrakhan and 4 bodyguards are. So when phone calls are being made and everything, and in fact, the assassins, according to the plan, they were supposed to go into the Audubon, slaughter Malcolm, escape using the crowd, and then make their way back to the Newark Mosque to be debriefed. That was the overall strategy or framework for the assassination. Well, that's where the only one assassin will ultimately make it back that evening, and that's going to be Bradley, who fired the shotgun. But Lewis is right there. So according to Jeremiah, what Elijah Muhammad is doing is he's bloody and he's forcing Farrakhan to be a player in this, whether he wants to or not. And that's what Jeremiah's thing was. He said, y'all don't know Elijah Muhammad. That's how his mind worked. He was basically tying Farrakhan to Malcolm's assassination so that in the future, if he ever reached a point where he wants to come clean, he's going to have to explain why he himself is right there and he's not doing nothing to stop this thing from happening. To nobody did he say, hey, y'all, this ain't right, y'all. Let's stop this. So he's tying Farrakhan's hands. That's the story that Jeremiah told Les Payne on his deathbed. And I think that, there's no reason to doubt any aspect of that story.
Wow.
And it goes along with everything else that we already knew that I'd already talked about in my book anyway, and that is that. Now, one other thing that was important about Les Payne's book that I learned, to help put more things in perspective. There was a conference that took place. Now, let me just say this for the record. When I was doing my research, thanks to Paul's, organization, I got an opportunity to interview Wilfred, Malcolm's oldest brother.
Right.
Okay, so I flew up to Detroit, stayed with Paul, spent the day with Wilfred. And Wilfred talked to, he told us about an incident. He couldn't remember where it was. That's what I remember about it. But he said that he remembers Elijah Muhammad saying to, and it was a gathering of, ministers, captains, and, FOIs, maybe some lieutenants. He didn't know, he was kind of, fuzzy. But this is what he remembered, and this is what I remember from my notes, looking at my notes from the interview. He said that Elijah Muhammad said that he hoped to see Malcolm's children begging for bread in the streets.
Wow.
But he didn't know where, where that happened. Well, one of the things that Les Payne talks about, he talks about a meeting again that I didn't know about. Okay. But it took place in September in Michigan. And that at this meeting, which Jeremiah facilitated, at this particular meeting, Elijah Muhammad told it was a meeting of ministers and captains, FOI, and Elijah Muhammad stated to his flock that he wanted them to do bodily harm, what was the term? Fatal bodily harm to Malcolm X. And what I'm starting to realize is I'm not sure, and I probably want to talk to Paul about this, because if anybody would have some, it would probably be Paul. But I'm trying to figure out whether or not that possibly was the meeting that Wilford was talking about. Because remember, Wilford was still in the nation during this time period. He was a Detroit minister. And so all that to say that Payne, I think, has become that person that I was hoping for, who could then take our understanding to the next level as far as Malcolm's assassination is concerned. And I think that he has, just with those things, just those three things right there, I think have really enhanced our understanding of Malcolm's assassination, and basically has pretty much added, more substance, to my thesis, in the first edition of my book.
Do you know when Wilford actually left the nation?
Wilford, I want to say he was gone. Again, Paul would know specifically. I know he was gone by 68. He was definitely gone by 68.
So he stayed even 3 years after the assassination.
Yeah, he stayed a little while after the assassin. And then he said that he just kind of gradually kind of eased on out the door.
So do you think it was fear, or just what's your thoughts on that, as far as him staying that length of time?
Right. I think that for the most part, I think Wilford was just kind of like biding his time. I think that had he left right away, I don't think that, I don't think he probably trusted the nation at that stage and stuff. I think probably for safety reasons. And so I think that he just kind of gradually eased on. He just kind of gradually eased on out the door. I think Filbert, stayed longer. And remember, Filbert let himself be used by them. Like, he went before the cameras and talked about Malcolm being mentally ill and all that. Filbert would pretty much say whatever that they needed him to say. He was used. Wilford didn't go that route, and it appears that they respected him enough to not try to force Wilford's hand to just jump on in there. And remember, they were secretively meeting periodically, Malcolm and Wilford.
Right.
They still had a relationship that if Elijah Muhammad and them knew about it, that would have been, very detrimental, I think, for Wilford. Because they would have probably viewed Wilford maybe as a traitor or something, as a hypocrite, which is how they helped to justify Malcolm's killing. He was a hypocrite, So it's a horrible story. Malcolm's assassination is a horrible story. And I'll tell you something else that's horrible too. They got this new guard, of the nation. Now, in the book that I got coming out, I have a small little message for Farrakhan, in which I'm calling on Farrakhan as a leader of African people to just basically just come clean and let's stop, let's shut that spigot off. Like there's this new thing going on now. Like I was listening to Nelson, Carl Nelson, on his show at different times last year. He had on Akbar Muhammad and he had Wesley Muhammad, and they're all making these arguments now that Raymond Wood's revelations, about the NYPD, participating in assassination and all that, they're using that now to argue that because of what Woods is saying, it proves that the nation ain't had nothing to do with Malcolm's assassination. Huh?
Right.
So we got a race traitor who makes a couple statements, offering us very little substance, by the way. But the nation is using that now. I think somebody even wrote a book in reference to this. So, didn't we kill Malcolm or something like that? But it's like they're still playing these games. Malcolm's been dead for over 50-something years, and they're still trying to come up with ways to make it seem as though the nation were victims. And by the way, that's what came out on the Carl Nelson show. It was like they were trying to make this argument. I think Carl Nelson asked, was it Akbar? Yeah, he asked Akbar when he was interviewing him after the whole Woods thing. Well, has anybody apologized to y'all for accusing y'all of killing Malcolm? Huh? So it's like a race traitor connects the NYPD, which I'd already done in my book anyway, to Malcolm's assassination, and that's proof that the nation was innocent of Malcolm's assassination. So let's ignore everything that the FOI did. Let's ignore everything that Elijah Muhammad said. Let's ignore everything that Muhammad Speak said. Let's ignore all those attempts on Malcolm's life in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in Boston, in Philadelphia, in New York. Let's ignore all of those things because Raymond Woods said that the NYPD had something to do with Malcolm's assassination. So everything that the nation did, apparently, just like a magic wand or something being waved, that's the proof that they had nothing. Raymond Woods proves that the nation had nothing to do with Malcolm's assassination. This is unbelievable logic, or lack thereof logic. But that's what they're arguing right now. So my thing in this next edition is I have a message from Farrakhan. You can come forward finally and lay the record straight. By all means, feel free to talk about my research on Malcolm's, from the FBI and all that type of stuff. Certainly we can tie them into it, but the nation has to accept its responsibility after 50-something years. At what stage can we lay this to rest? Farrakhan knows. He knows that the nation killed Malcolm X. He knows some of the members of the team that killed Malcolm X. He knows that Elijah Muhammad was in the forefront of the assassination of Malcolm X, and the national leadership was in the forefront of the assassination. He knows all of this. Let's lay this to rest once and for all, instead of bringing up a new generation of scholars in the nation who are going to try to perpetuate this thing that, hey, the nation had nothing to do with Malcolm's assassination. It was all the government and blah, 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 blah. We got to be better than this. Who's that? Cummings used to always say that, Elijah Cummings before he died. We're better than this. We got to be better than this. We can't have another generation coming up with this facade. I
think you're the first person on this show to quote Elijah Cummings, but we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna give you that today. But yeah, so let me ask you this. I mean, before I go to the next question, I want to ask you, I mean, you wrote this book, almost 3 decades ago, correct? Yeah.
29 years.
29?
Yep, 29 years. It'll be 30 years in next year.
30 years. So have you had because of the fact that, as some viewers would say, that's a bold talk you talking, Baba Zak. Have you had any issues? Have you had any, has there been any types of repercussions, and you know what I'm saying?
Mostly, you know, I mean, people have sold wolf tickets. There's been intimidation type of stuff. I'll never forget. I gave a lecture one time. Had the book come out yet? I don't remember. You know, it's like 30 years ago. But so I don't know if the book had come out. I think the book had come out. Yeah, it had come out. I gave a lecture at Newark.
Mm-hmm. In Newark.
Okay. In Newark, wow. Right.
Okay.
And it was like a standing room only. It was like I want to say it was at the library or something. But they had it, you know, like standing room only, basically. And half of the audience were Mos 25. Right. And the minister was there too. The minister at Mos number 25. And they kind of, you know, and they were kind of like, they were massed toward the front of the building. So I'm speaking, and within 5 feet, wow. Because the chairs were real close, you know, like there was a small platform, and then there were chairs right below the platform and stuff. And so, you know, it was like a real strong show of force, right? You know, from the nation. I was sponsored by the Malcolm X grassroots movement. They had sponsored me.
Okay.
So, and you know, and I stayed on point. You know, I talked about Mos 25. I talked about the FBI. I talked about Elijah Muhammad. You know, and I wasn't sure where things were going. I did have a security. I did have a small security force. You know, that was kind of there. You know, representing the you know, the Malcolm X grassroots, you know, movement and stuff. You know, yeah. Who had sponsored me. But anyway, but this is what was good. The minister asked a series of questions that I was happy to answer. And they were reasonable questions. And it was obvious that he was a thinker. So he's processing them. You know, he would ask me a question, I'd process it. He said, okay, thank you, brother. He asked me another question and stuff like that. And then he asked me at the end, his last question was, so let me ask you something, brother. What would you recommend that the nation do right now for us to try to resolve this whole, you know, it was like a question like that. And I gave him, you know, like I thought first you got to come clean, and, you know, our community, I think will understand, and, you know, let's get everything out in the open. Also let the nation, you know, since Farrakhan has taken over the nation, he's the gatekeeper now of its legacy. So, you know, since everybody else is gone, he has to, he has to basically accept the responsibility for it and stuff. So I just talked about stuff like that. And I just remember the brother was sitting there taking notes and being very respectful. And see, to me, that's the type of dialogue that we need to get past this, you know? And so, you know, after that, I always thought that the energy, you know, of the room changed after that, you know, because I think initially it was to intimidate me.
Right.
And that's why they're all over, you know, all up on the stage and all that type of stuff. But I think in the end, you know, it was about, you know, reasonably trying to move forward from this point. And that's the way I basically interpret it. I've been in other cases, you know, like I think some of y'all have seen that thing. I don't know if it's still on YouTube, but when me and Conrad Muhammad, and they had a walkout. I don't know if you can see it on the film, but this was in 1995. This was like the 30th anniversary of Malcolm's assassination. And while I'm speaking, they have a walkout, like 3 rows of the MGT, the girls training program. They get up, you know, while I'm speaking, and they turn, and then they foul out, you know, one line after another line. It took like 10 minutes of my presentation, you know, so I just kind of, you know, stopped for a minute and just let them kind of like walk out. But it was like, what the hell was that? Now, later they're going to say that because I was talking about Elijah Muhammad, they didn't know if something was going to happen and they wanted to protect the women and all this type of stuff. But to me, it was just a scheme. It was just playing a silly game instead of just confronting the reality. And that's what we're going to need to do. We need to simply confront the reality. And then, hey, look, let's take our blows where we made mistakes. Let's take our blows, because that's the first step in healing. Just take your blows. Yeah, you had people back then. And in fact, technically, you can even disassociate yourself, because that was a whole different generation back then. Disassociate yourself. But look, back then, that's the mentality. Back then, that's how things happen. It's a simple equation and stuff. But you first got to be willing to accept responsibility. And if you're constantly teaching generation after generation after generation that you didn't kill Malcolm, even though periodically, Farrakhan has implied that zealots, I think is the term he likes to use, that it's possible that some zealots may have participated in Malcolm said. No, he knows damn well it's worse than that. It wasn't just zealots. These were rank and file people that he himself knows, because he was at the station of operations during the actual assassination. So just come clean. Farrakhan's almost 90. He's almost 90 years old. If not now, when? It is time. We need to lay this to rest. And to be honest with you, Farrakhan really is the only person who can lay this to rest, because he's the common denominator. He was there then. He's still there now. Almost everybody else, they're dead. They're ancestors. They're dead. Farrakhan is that link between the past and now. He's the link between the old nation that killed Malcolm and the current nation that he is basically, that he has resurrected. He is the person more qualified than anybody else to finally set the record straight. And that is what I'm hoping for. That's why I'm, revising and will put my book out again. I'm hoping that it will, help to resolve first and foremost pressing questions that I wasn't able to finish, to resolve initially. But more than that, I'm also hoping that it will serve as a spark, if you will, for Farrakhan to finally set the record straight.
Hey, Baba, you was busting so many shots. I'm like, my earphones, is popping right now. So we definitely appreciate that. I got a couple more questions before I let you go, because I know you have things to do as well. First off,
I need to pick up my baby daughter from high school. I'm good for about 20 more minutes.
That's all we need. You know what I'm saying? We already got it measured out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's all good. For folks who are just tuning in, you're checking out Baba Zac Kondo. Baba Zac Kondo is a author, scholar, and an authority on the assassination of Al-Haj Malik Shabazz, known as Malcolm X. And we're honored to have him here today. If it's your first time tuning in to Black Power Media, make sure you subscribe. And for folks who are checking it out and appreciate what you've heard so far, please be sure to share this video, because of the fact that it needs to be seen and needs to be heard. I want to, recently, I believe in November, Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam was exonerated. I wanted to know your thoughts on exoneration and, just your thoughts on that. And then the second part of that particular question is, you were involved in the film Who Killed Malcolm X. So I want to know your thoughts on both of those particular pieces and, run it from there, if that's cool.
Okay. Well, let me deal with your first question first. I actually interviewed both, Butler and Johnson, Aziz and Khalil, when I was doing my research. And I was actually impressed by both of them. And of course, I argue in my book that they didn't no more kill Malcolm than I did. And I was about 5 years old, I think, when Malcolm was killed. So certainly, I certainly am, somebody who appreciated, as racist as the judicial system is, as corrupt as the criminal justice system is, it was good that but remember now, and this is just a technical issue, they didn't exonerate them. What that court order basically did, what they did was they vacated they vacated the judgment that basically found them guilty. Exoneration, and this is just a legal technical thing, that would have required something different. And in fact, what they said, if you read the actual order, what they basically say is that they're not going to even address the issue of whether or not the men were guilty or innocent. They said what they will address is all of the procedural and substantive actions that took place during the trial and the investigation that, had they been done properly, would have been favorable to the two defendants. So that's what their ruling revolves around. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. One thing, though, that we do want to make clear, neither Butler nor Johnson had halos on their head when it came to Malcolm. And in fact, remember, Peter went into the prisons and interviewed both of them. And when he asked Butler, had you been given an order, because remember, Butler and Johnson were both part of Captain Joseph's goon squad. Okay. And they were constantly harassing Malcolm and Malcolm's people and cracking heads here and there and stuff like that. So my point is that we're not talking about two men with halos on their head. Right. They were Malcolm's enemies. And at a given point, at a given time, possibly could have done what the Newark team did. So I just kind of want to just keep this in some type of perspective here. Right. Okay.
Right. Before you get to the film, because of the fact that there's a question in the chat, I've been getting a whole bunch of questions, but I want to deal with this one just for clarity. Someone asked, where does the FBI and CIA fit in with this analysis and assessment? They said, I would think that they played no role at all at Malcolm's assassination after hearing this, which I find impossible to believe. Can you address that, please?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think if the person had been listening closely to what I said earlier, then then I think he wouldn't have kept the same perspective.
Right. And I heard you. I just wanted to repeat that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I don't mind addressing it because I didn't go into detail. But let me just make this real clear. First off, I found no evidence of CIA involvement in Malcolm's assassination. Okay. But FBI, what Malcolm's case presented to the FBI, and we have to understand counterintelligence. In many ways, Malcolm's assassination provided the FBI the ideal counterintelligence scheme. And when I say counterintelligence means that when organizations like the FBI, they take secretive, oftentimes illegal, immoral, unethical actions behind the scenes to manipulate and to exploit weaknesses in their targets. So this is what the FBI did to help to facilitate Malcolm's assassination. They exploited weaknesses, problems between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X and the royal family, which is Elijah Muhammad's family. And in my book, I document a series of actions. And this is what they're doing. They have wired Elijah Muhammad's homes, both the one in Phoenix and the one in Chicago, the headquarters of the Nation of Islam. They got Malcolm's house wired. They got they got other, so they're listening to everything that's going on inside these people's homes, talking in private. And I always like to use this example because it really represents how the enemy worked. Go back to May 1963. Elijah Muhammad is in Phoenix. He's by himself. He's sick. He's not feeling good. He's been throwing up blood. He's talking on the phone to one of his people, and he tells them, I feel like I just want to kill myself. I feel like I'm just dying. Oh, God, I'm in such pain. He says this over the phone. The FBI is listening to this. They're hearing this. This is how counterintelligence works. And then what happens here is that a series of phone calls are made to Elijah Muhammad's phone. When he answers the phone, they tell him, old man, you should kill yourself. You're worthless. Kill yourself. That's counterintelligence. And that's what they did throughout between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad. They hear some of Elijah Muhammad's children saying something bad about upset about something that Malcolm did, and then they would get informants of someone to call and continue that line of questioning, to continue that type of hate. So it reaches the point in which the FBI had done their job so well that they could have just stepped to the back and the nation took over. And they appealed to Elijah Muhammad's ego. Malcolm here and there may have said something here and there that helped to, escalate it. But the bottom line was that the enemy exploited weaknesses and problems within the nation and Malcolm to the point that the nation took over and said, Malcolm is a hypocrite. Malcolm deserves death. And of course, the whole babies thing made everything worse. That was really the real key. When Malcolm started talking about the babies, Elijah Muhammad's babies, because that was the nation's Achilles heel, was the babies. Now, today, they're wives. They were not wives in 1964 and 1965. They were viewed as sluts in 1964 and 1965. And the nation attacked them and didn't even want to pay them child support. So when Malcolm talked about the babies starting in June 1964, that's what basically turned Elijah Muhammad. That's what pushed him. So what we now know is Elijah Muhammad picked up the ball from what the enemy had been giving them, and then he finished the story.
Wow. That was heavy. I want to point out one thing, and then you can complete about the film itself. I wanted to point out for folks who are asking about Bossy, is the Bureau of Special Services out in New York, part of the NYPD. And one of the folks who were involved with that particular special unit was a cat by the name of Eugene Roberts. Eugene Roberts was at the Audubon Ballroom during the time of the assassination, but he also was able to infiltrate the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party by joining them later on and working to make efforts to take them down. So one thing about the state is they will recycle their garbage and use it as many times as possible, because they don't have to come up with new improved methods. They might tweak it a little bit, but again, they do the same thing over and over and over and over again, and we play right on into it as if we didn't see the last trick go down. I want to ask you about the film Who Killed Malcolm X, because of the fact that so many folks hated it. We know that somehow you had gotten involved. I've checked out some of the interviews where you explain what was what on it, but I'd like you to, if you could, just address that here with with our guests.
Okay, yeah. This film, first off, I regret participating in the film. I had no idea that that was the way that they were gonna, take that film. I thought, and the other thing, I didn't know Skip Gates, Lewis Henry Gates from the brothers from Harvard. I didn't know he was the producer, because if I would have known he was the producer, that's all I would have needed, because I don't trust. I wouldn't trust. That would have told me that that film wasn't going to be serious, because anybody who knows Gates, knows that he's only
Skip
going
him.
to take this as far as it's going to benefit him, and that's the end of the story. So he's not going to talk about FBI on a serious level. He's not going to talk about counterintelligence or anything like that. His focus was just on the nation, but it was more than the nation. And what they did was, when they interviewed me, I talked about the nation too, because you have to talk about the nation. But I also talked about the FBI and gave detailed stuff. They deleted. They didn't share none of that, because all they wanted to do was to just use it as a club to go after the nation. That's what they wanted to do. And they succeeded, basically, I think, in doing that. But Malcolm's assassination was much more complex than just the Nation of Islam. But, and you have to talk about, in other words, you cannot talk about Malcolm's assassination without talking about the FBI. You can't. You're playing games if you do. And also Balsi, the Bureau of Special Service. They did do a little bit, I thought, on Balsi, but that was it. They could have been much more serious had they wanted to be, but they didn't want to be. This film, by the way, wasn't about necessarily putting out the truth. I will say this, the whole emphasis on Butler and Johnson's innocence and stuff, which they made it seem as though Muhammad, was the one who I mean, that was absurd. The storyline of that film is absurd. To try to focus on this lone crusader trying to solve Malcolm's assassination because he was dissatisfied. It's an absurd. Anybody who knows anything about Malcolm's assassination world knows that's absurd. All of that was absurd. And again, I didn't know that, and I didn't know, and so when they were talking about doing a second one from Jump Street, and in fact, I think I said publicly, don't even lose my damn number. I have no interest whatsoever in participating in anything, in the part 2 version of that facade.
No doubt. There you have it, folks. Baba Zak, we appreciate you coming on. Hopefully you can leave us with 3 of the best books that you think we should get to in regards to Malcolm, if you have that time. If not, we understand, but we definitely appreciate you coming on and joining us today on Riot Starter TV and Black Power Media. It's definitely impossible.
So you said three books?
3, 5, whatever you can do. The best.
Okay. Well, certainly any book that Peter Bailey said, wrote, needs to be out there. Peter Goodman's book, particularly the second volume. I haven't gotten to the third volume. Understand there's a third volume, but I'm going to get to that certainly. The autobiography of Malcolm X. Malcolm X Speaks. Because nobody can do better than Malcolm's. Hear Malcolm's voice. Get Malcolm's speeches themselves. And of course, when my new book comes out, certainly I would highly recommend my book on Malcolm's assassination. This should be my last one on Malcolm X. So I'm hoping, to kind of put all of the stuff on the table and wait for the next generation, if they need to go there, to add to as far as the assassination is concerned.
Well, we're looking forward to bringing you on when the new book drops. So again, we appreciate you taking the time out of your day. You know what I mean? I've been trying to contact you for months, and come to find out I was texting the wrong number. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, it was an honor being here, and I appreciate the work that the network does, and I'm just proud that you that the younger generation are doing these types of things. So I commend this whole structure. This is what our people need, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Hey, we appreciate you, Baba, and our network is your network. Stay on top of the world, and we're gonna see you in a few ticks. You've been, it's been a pleasure, been an honor. You've been checking out, yes, sir. You've been checking out Baba Zac Kondo right here on Riot Starter TV. I mean, that was fire. What y'all think, man? I mean, I don't know. I think that this was a heavy joint. I learned a lot of the stuff I've heard through checking out his interviews, and a lot of it was new. So that's always beautiful, and it's always refreshing. We want to keep on bringing you this type of content because of the fact that we love us, and we want to make sure that we're on the right side of the barricades, and we want folks to hear things from the horse's mouth. We don't want to speculate. We want to break things down. We're not doing this to make ourselves look good. We want to do this to make sure that we are on the right side of things. So we appreciate you all for checking us out. I ask of you two things. One, actually three. One, to subscribe, like, and share the channel, but also to share this particular episode of Riot Starter TV, and make sure you check out the archives. We appreciate all that you do for us. We have a whole lot of great programming coming up this weekend. First and foremost, check out I Mix What I Like tomorrow morning with Dr. Jared Ball, my homie and hater in charge. And he'll be rocking tomorrow morning from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Also, we have my sister and Rebel in charge, Jacqueline Jackie Lukman. You can check out her show tomorrow. Right here on Riot Starter TV. Excuse me, right here on Riot Starter TV. Right here on Black Power Media as well. I don't have the time on deck. I believe it's 5 p.m. She's in the chat. She can let you know. And on Saturday, we have Warriors class at 1 p.m. But make sure you just check out all that we do Sundays on Sunday, and we'll be back to Remix Morning Show next week. Love and appreciation. Stay ready for revolution. Support our work. Make sure you join the organization. We out.